we'll jump into to Jeroen's presentation, but for those of you that don't know, Jeroen is a program manager at Microsoft. He works on super secret data stuff, including Power BI, and he specializes in advanced analytics, big data, machine learning, data visualization, and business intelligence. And he works with Microsoft as well as several open source technologies. He's got a blog at DutchDataDude.com. And with that, I'm going to stop my share and hand things over to you, Jeroen.
So yeah, I'm Jay, or Jeroen, as some people call me. Well, originally I'm called Jeroen, but I anglified it a little bit for people that, unlike Mark, don't want to try to pronounce it, which I really appreciate. So yeah, I'm from the Netherlands. That's why my nickname is Dutch Data Dude. I moved to Washington State in December of 2018, so almost 2 years ago, to join the Microsoft product group on Azure SQL first, SQL Server a little bit, and finally to land on what I can say technology-wise is my first love, Power BI. Good. So let's talk about composite models. Everything that's happening there, we'll talk about that at length here. But just as a quick, refresher, what is the Power BI team really trying to do, right? I'm part of the Power BI team. I work on the self-service side of it, and I'm responsible for the data modeling and DAX side. So if you have DAX questions, don't come to me. Read the book by Ferrari and Rousseau. But if you have DAX issues in the sense that, like, oh, this could be way better if you turn the usability into this shape, or you change that about DAX, and that will make it way more useful and easy to use for all of us. Please let those things come to me, right? Let me know if you have one of those ideas. Same for modeling. If we can do better on the modeling side of things when you work with a data model in Power BI, tell me, please. I need your input to make this into a better product. So modeling and DAX, that's my little area of the whole product. Which doesn't mean I don't know anything about AI. I don't know anything about the visual sides or the Power Query or whatever. I tend to go everywhere, but that's my focus, data modeling and DAX. So, and you probably saw my name, by the way, in also today's blog post, but also last month's blog post on the announcements for everything that's happening around Power BI. So when we talk about Power BI, we really think about a couple steps, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. You probably know all of this already. But basically Power BI is here in the world, and we as a team are here in the world to help you break down data silos, work with all types of data, regardless if it's big or small, if it's structured or semi-structured, if it's in the database, a file, a website, an external source, an internal source, it doesn't really matter. We are here to provide you the capability to handle all of the data for not only just all of the data, but we want everybody to be able to do that. You don't need to follow a course of 6 weeks to be able to do Power BI like you have to do with some of our competitors out there. You don't have to follow anything, really. With the most recent updates, we made it as easy as you just start Power BI, and you will just see like little, I would say, Clippy-like experience almost, not Clippy itself, but like a real guided experience. If you don't know what to do, these are the steps you need to take to get started. So even if you haven't got any training, we hope Power BI is a good tool for you. And if you had training, if you did all the training online, got a certificate, read all the books, there's still a lot in Power BI for you to explore and discover, right? Every month we're doing new things, trying to make the tool better for all data, for everyone, and then for every decision. And basically with that, what we try to do is all data for everyone, for every decision means it can work for anybody in any setting, in your work life, in your private life. If you're a CEO, or if you're just a manager or individual contributor to an organization, if you're on your own in a startup. I once bought my house using data analytics. So, you can use it for every little decision or every big decision that you might have to make. And that's really what drives us. We try to drive a data culture within our customer organization, within ourselves, for starters, to really empower everybody to make every decision they need to make, big or small, using data. Now, that's all great. That is what drives us every day, and we we work towards that lofty goal, right? But we know we're not done. We know we have work to do, right? There's a lot of things that we can do to make this better, but you can only do so much in a day or in a week or in a semester, really. So for us, it's all about thinking about what is the actual little or bigger things that we need to build to make the experience that users have with our product better. And one of those areas that we have been looking into recently, and when I say recently, it's actually something of the last approximately 2 years, I think, is the composite model area. And the composite model area is really an area that strikes close to my heart, because it really is the bridge between what we used to call enterprise BI or business intelligence, and the new area, the newish area where Power BI was born, called self-service BI or self-service analytics. And really, composite models is built to bridge those two areas. But there are a couple of limitations, a couple of issues with that current solution of composite models, because composite models already exists. So why would we invest in the first place? And that's what this session is really about. We're going to talk about what is going on with composite models, why we're revisiting this, and what we're changing, and what the impact will be. And the best way for me, I believe, to explain that is not to jump into technology right away. Because really, all of this technology is great, but in the end of the day, if it doesn't matter to you, if it isn't valuable to you or useful in your life for any of these things, like all data, every decision, whatever you try to do, we failed. So if we do technology first, it doesn't work that way. We need to look at who's using it, why, for what purpose, in what situation. Now, in order for us to kind of explore this area of composite models and why we're revisiting it, I want to tell you a little story. And that story, I dubbed it "The Tale of Two Kingdoms." And you'll see it's a little bit, you know, out there maybe, but you'll see parallels to the business world, not only in the images, but also in the kind of problems that I describe. So the Tale of Two Kingdoms, just humor me for the next 10 slides or so, and then we can talk about technology, okay? So the Tale of Two Kingdoms really starts in Business Suela. And Business Suela is the marketing and business analytics side of a big organization. And this big organization is really almost a kingdom. And they do deals with people across the world, across the globe, in different countries as well. And you're here, you're a business analyst in Business Suela, and you use Power BI. And with Power BI, you combine whatever your heart wants to do, whatever your heart desires, you combine it, and you bring value to the organization by bringing that together, and then 1 + 1 = 3, and that is what you give to your boss, right? So you just basically sit there using your laptop in this magic software called Power BI, and you take your Excel sheet, your CSVs, your SQL databases, your Hadoop cluster, your Spark instance, this website, this REST APIs, SharePoint lists, and you just go to, you mesh them together, and you turn them into a magic little ball, and that explodes, and it brings more value to the organization and drives the better data decisions that your boss is really paying you for, to enable them to make that, right? So here you are, life is good, right? I mean, Power BI is magic. It's almost like the magic of software in the actual software. Well, you know, life is good until we reach a certain point, because someday you're asked to come to the office to present basically to the king of Business Suela, and she says, or the queen of Business Suela, I should say, actually. She says, you know, I love what you're doing. I see the value you're bringing. I love the ability that the software you're using, that you've been trained in, brings us to, you know, combine A and B and come up with a new answer, new insights that really, really helps me every day and to make all of my important decisions. So thumbs up for that. However, I've got a very important assignment for you. The Queen says, we're thinking about entering in a trade agreement with our neighboring country. And the neighboring country is, by the way, called Afghanistan. And that neighboring country, we've never done any deals with them. We don't really know how they work. They seem really strange in the habits they have. The language is different. So I need somebody that can kind of work as an ambassador to kind of analyze with them, work with them to bring value to this trade agreement. Because if I don't get the data to analyze what's going on and you don't help me bring that analyze to me, I don't feel this trade agreement is a good deal. So I need you to step up, go visit IT Stan and help me bring that trade agreement to life. So, hey, you know, if the Queen asks, what do? You go, right? So you go visit IT Stan. You either hop on your bicycle or airplane or whatever, depending on the travel restrictions and how far it all is. But you enter IT Stan, and the first thing you notice is that things work differently over there. There are different languages, different rules to follow, different laws even. Data is stored differently. It is stored in, for example, folders somewhere. They're really old, archaic database systems they use. And even if they have fancy database systems, it's all very much policed. It's very much controlled. It doesn't feel at all like what you've been doing in Business Suela, where you could just take whatever you wanted and combine all of it and, you know, push it into a big bowl and hand it back to whoever was asking for it, or even yourself, and look at it, right? Here you have to follow all of these rules. You have to ask for access to data. They have different rules and regulations. They don't want you to just download the data, mash it up. No, because they are afraid of losing track and control of where the data went and how it was used, by whom, for what decision, and when. So you have to really rethink what is going on. The data might be more sensitive. You don't really know because you haven't seen the data yet. So what you really feel like is you feel like you're at the Chinese wall, right? You're on one side, you're trying to get to the other side. Really, this big wall is between you and the other side. And that's where you are. You're in IT Stan and Business Suela. You're trying to bridge the two together, to marry the two together, really, to come up with this great analysis that is required for this trade agreement. But you hit a wall. So now what? What do we do? What can we do to make this happen? Do you go download that database from them illegally? Take it with you on a USB drive to Business Suela and go play with it? Is that even possible technically? Do we have a USB drive that is 10 terabytes in size? Because that's the size of that database you're working with. Well, maybe not. And do we really want to risk that? Because it's potentially sensitive information in there. I need to follow their rules and regulations that they give me in IT Stan. But I also want to satisfy what Business Suela asks of me. And now here we come to why we're here tonight. Because we heard this over and over and over again from all of our customers. Anybody working with composite models hits this wall at some point. Now let's talk about what a wall actually represents. So we enter the technology now. So we leave the story behind. I hope this was kind of useful for level setting it. And we talk about, you know, what is the limitation, what are the issues today with composite models, and then we can talk about what we're going to do about that. Okay, so composite models, just as a refresher, if you don't know by now, what composite models really allow you to do in Power BI, is you take your Power BI desktop, you go get data, and you can just choose whatever you want. You can say, you know what, I'm going to import data from an Excel sheet, and then I'm going to add some SQL Server data to that. And I'm going to, you know, I need the weather information. I don't store it in my own file somewhere. So I'll just take the National Weather Service REST API and get, you know, the latest weather data. And I mess it all up. I combine it on date or on location or whatever I'm trying to do here. And then I present it back using a report. And I bring great value and great insights to our organization, right? And some of this data is brought into Power BI, for example, the Excel sheet, and some of the data might stay in the source, like the SQL Server you connected to. And we call that import, when you bring the data over into Power BI, and direct query, when you leave the data where it actually is, but you query the data into your source and the data stays where it is, okay? So, and that's basically what you can do today. And they are used for aggregations and all fancy advanced features of Power BI. Actually requires composite models as kind of foundational work. Now, the problem I was describing with IT Stan and Business Suela is really that the moment you start looking into actual IT systems, you see that this story doesn't work. Because the moment you fire up Power BI, right, you just took your laptop from Business Suela to IT Stan, you fire up Power BI and you say, okay, tell me, what's the connection string to, let's say, the Azure Analysis Services database, right? And they give it to you. The moment you go get data from Azure Analysis Services, you enter or copy paste the URL, credentials, whatever you need to do. The moment you do that in Power BI, it is a live connection, which means the data stays where it is. That's great. So far, so good, because we don't expect you to go download the 10 terabyte or however much data is in that analysis service environment into Power BI. However, if you then go to get data and try to add your Excel sheet, you will see that doesn't work. Power BI will simply tell you, can't do, won't work, not available to you. So this whole composite model scenario breaks whenever you connect to either of these sources: SAP HANA, SAP BW, SQL Server Analysis Services, Power BI data sets, Azure Analysis Services. So really, if data is in one of those 5 sources, you cannot combine it with other data sources, unless you want to import all of the data into Power BI, which is 99% of the time impossible, just simply because the sheer amount of data that is in these type of enterprise data sources, with Power BI being a small exception, but the other 4 are definitely enterprise data sources. And if you use them, if you connect to them, you'll see there's no way for you to mash up the data with anything else, what you have been doing before with any composite model source. Now let's talk about composite models tomorrow for a given value of tomorrow, right? I will not disclose the release date here. You know, we're just not ready for that. But you know, we're working on it. That's basically what I can say. We're getting closer every day, but you know, we're not there entirely. But we might have an interesting Christmas present for you, just to put it that way. And really, when you think about what we need to do for composite models tomorrow, is we need to rethink that whole model of working with enterprise data sets. And when we talk about enterprise data sets, we really mean an enterprise semantic model. That's where we envision that IT combines data sources and makes them ready, using a semantic layer, makes them ready for business analytics. Okay, and in many enterprises, that is done using Azure Analysis Services. It's done using SQL Server Analysis Services. It's done in Power BI data sets. It's done in a myriad of things. And really what we want to do is we want to enable you with your Power BI environment on your laptop to connect to that great semantic model. Take whatever you need from there, not download it, but connect to it, and then still be able to extend that semantic model. And to take that semantic model and say, you know what, I like the way this is, but I need something extra. And that's in this Excel sheet. I want to enable you to bring that over and mash it up. And not only that, we not only are trying to cover the scenarios where you want to extend the data, we also want to enable you to personalize the data. For example, you know, I'm a European, I moved to the US, right? Less than 2 years ago. One of the things that I cannot get used to is that people here in the US, when they spell out a date, they say month, day, year, right? Well, I should do it the other way around on camera, month, day, year, right? The way I'm wired with my European background, that sounds really weird, right? For me, it's day, month, year. Very simple example. Now imagine the enterprise semantic model contains your sales data, and it was built by a person in the US. So the chance is 99% that the format string on that sale date is going to be month, day, year. But now you work in Europe, and people over there get confused when they see 12/31. They're like, how do we have 31 months? That doesn't make sense. So what you really want to do is you want to take that data from that enterprise semantic model, connect to it, and then make a very simple change where you say, you know what, for my analysis that is targeted not at the US market, but at the European market, I'm going to change the format string to say day, month, year. And I know this is a very basic example, but it allows me to illustrate, personalize, right? Here, we're not extending the data, we're just changing something, could be small, could be big, about the enterprise semantic model, and allowing you to publish those changes back to your community. So really, when we think about what the things we're doing about around composite models really are, there's two big things. One, we're allowing you to extend semantic models from IT. For example, if you start with a Power BI dataset or another services model, or if you start using import, you can still add other sources. That's the extend portion. And next to that, we're going to allow you to personalize the semantic model. If you don't want to extend it, all the data in there is fine, but you're just missing that one format string, or you're missing that one measure, or you don't like the name of this table or that column or the relationship, or a calculated column is really missing. In that scenario, you're not adding any data, you're not extending it, you're personalizing it to your specific situation. And both of those things are things that we're going to cover here. Now, even when this happens, there will still be a couple of limitations, because we cannot boil the sun, we cannot do everything, right? We cannot boil the ocean, by the way, I should be saying. Boil the sun, really? Wow. Okay. Whew. Boil the ocean. We cannot do everything in one day, right? So we're going to make a couple steps here, and you'll see that this scenario where you can extend the data source that you connect to from IT and personalize the things that you connected to from IT will start working for Power BI data sets and Azure Analysis Services. That's why what you see here on the screen is a screenshot from the documentation, where we'll, the documentation will be updated, and you'll see Power BI data sets and Azure Analysis Services being removed as items you cannot work with when you do a composite model. So Power BI data sets, Azure Analysis Services will be fully supported as a source for a composite model. So you can connect to a Power BI data set and then still extend the data or personalize it. And the same for Azure Analysis Services. Now, SQL Server Analysis Services is a slightly different story. We have, of course, two versions. We have the UDM or multidimensional world, and we have the tabular world, which really is the engine under all of Power BI, and it's also the engine under Azure Analysis Services. Now, for SQL Server Analysis Services, the tabular mode will be supported after an engine update. So when you apply the engine update, we'll be able to support that for you. But the multidimensional one, multidimensional Azure SQL Analysis Services, so the cubes with the UDMs and the MDX and all of that good stuff, which I used to work with a lot. And I could never get the hierarchies right. It was always the other way around, and I expected it to be. I'm sure you've seen that as well. SQL Server Analysis Services multidimensional will not be supported for now using this updated version of composite models. And the same for SAP HANA and the same for SAP BW. And the reason for those two not being supported is very simple. We're not ready to build a house on a shaky foundation. Currently, we have a lot of problems and issues with people doing basic stuff with HANA and BW. So let's fix the foundation first. Let's make sure that works before we try to build extra stories to our house on this shaky foundation. So that's as clear as I can get it. That foundation needs to be fixed before we will pile on this extra features. Not saying we don't want to, but just, I don't want to build a house that will, flood out the second something happens. So we need to build the foundation and strengthen the foundation first here. So whenever we have the updated version of composite models, you will be able to take a Power BI data set, take an Azure Analysis Services database, connect to it live, extend it, and personalize it. Okay, so let's talk about what it will look like. So here I have Power BI Desktop, and I'm connected to our Enterprise Semantic Model. It is an Azure Analysis Services database, and it shows me sales amounts. It's a sales report that I built. You know, there's things like geography, lead times, customer, date, sales amounts, you know, kind of the adventure work structure, if you will. Great. I just connected to this live, so there's nothing new here, right? Well, you know, you might have noticed since a couple months, I think it was June or July, if you did this, if you connected to an Azure Analysis Services or any live source really, even a Power BI data set, you might have noticed there's a new icon that shows up that normally was hidden. You already know the icon, but that was always hidden. And that icon is the model view. Now this is getting a lot of updates, by the way, soon, also to prepare for the composite model. But you have seen something like this if you did a live connected source, although you didn't see any colors probably, but you have seen something like this where, you know, the data model that is in this Azure Analysis Services source is shown on your screen. You cannot do anything with it, but now you at least understand how the relationships go, right? You see if they're bidirectional, one-to-one, many-to-many, one-to-many. You see that, which is something that's very useful. And for us, this was a step towards composite models. So this is the way we're building this product, just adding little nuggets over time. So this is the first step towards composite models. I can see my data model of the Enterprise Semantic Model that I've connected to. All of these tables that are now labeled as with red on the screen here, we tend to call that an island. And that's not the definitive name, but let's call it an island for now. An island is basically a set of tables that came from the same source. Okay, cool. So now what can we do? Well, in your version today, you cannot do anything apart from reporting on this. You cannot add data. You cannot add a calculated column. You cannot do anything like that. But in this version, we can. So we can go back to get data and say, you know what, this sales data is great, but I really need a finance angle. And I'm going to connect to my Power BI instance and Power BI environment, and I'm going to take this finance model. That finance model that finance published, it's certified, it's promoted, it's great. It is there, I trust it. I'm just going to take that finance model and I'm going to link to it from Power BI. I'm not bringing it over because the finance model is a data set. It might be huge. I don't want that. I just want to link to it. Same as I did with the Enterprise Semantic Model. It says Analysis Services database somewhere. It might be multi-terabyte. I don't want to bring it all over into Power BI and download all the data. I need to link to it. So what we're going to do, we're going to connect to the finance model. And now what we have is two islands. We have a red island and a green island. And that's why it was important I told you about the islands before, because now you immediately see we have two disjunct data sets. You can also see there's two date tables here. There's a date table from the finance and a dates table from the sales model, or the other way around. There is probably also a customer data set that is a customer table that is shared between the two. Okay, well, pretty cool so far. Useful. Questionable, because what can you do? There's two separate data sets. I cannot, you know, add something that will offset one versus the other because they're not connected at all. They're two dates now, so usefulness, meh. But what I can do, I can start doing interesting things. I can, for example, say, you know what, that date table from the finance model, I'm not going to use it. I'm going to park it. I'm going to hide it. I will be using this one date table from the sales model, and I will build a relationship between the red and the green island where we go from the date in the sales model to the date key, the date ID in the finance model. And while I'm at it, I know customer is also included in the finance model, but it's not as a separate table. But I really want extra information about the customer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build another relationship between customer from sales to the finance data set. Right, so here you see two what we call cross-island relationships. And that's very powerful because now I can start doing interesting things. I can, for example, say, let me build a measure that takes data from the finance model and takes data from the sales model and just, you know, calculates something as little as a margin. You know, it was missing. It was not present in any of the two data sources because both data sources was missing part of the information they needed for the calculation. So let me just calculate the margin, right? The margin percentage actually, because I'm using a divide here. So I'm taking the sales from my sales model, and I'm going to the finance model, the finance metrics table, and I'm taking the royalty and the volume discount, and I'm dividing all of that. I'm subtracting that and dividing that by sales. So here I'm building a measure that actually spans these two islands. And I can do that now since I was able to bring them together and load them both and build a relationship. And then I can use this margin percentage in a visual. Here I have the same table, a date and sales, both from the sales island, and a margin that we defined on the sales island, but uses data from the finance data set. Isn't this cool? It's amazing that we can do this, right? But we're not done. We're not done by a mile. Because why stop at 2? Why would we stop at 2? I mean, in how many business scenarios do you really have only 2 sources? So we know we should not build this technology to just be able to combine 2 enterprise sources, because really, in most of the cases, the enterprise sources are great, but there might just be this little thing missing that you get from somewhere else, like an Excel sheet or an external source somewhere. So why stop at 2? Why not go back to get data and, let's say, import an Excel sheet? Right? And that's the third island, the blue box here, which is just one table, a table of an island of one table, because it was just an Excel sheet or a REST API that just produces a bunch of rows in one table. And that links to date on the sales model, and to geography on the sales model has no direct link to finance, but through these, of course, has a link to finance. And we can now use this third data source to, just as the green island, to build relationships, to build measures, visuals on top of all of this data. That's 3 islands, and we can continue building. I've seen a colleague using 64 islands just to see what it does. You know, at some point you need to question yourself what you're actually doing, and of course this person was testing the system. So we envision, you know, maybe 5 or 10 might be normalish. You know, I don't expect anybody to go to 64 or whatever, but, you know, just know that there is no limit here, except what you import into Power BI will of course take resources. So this blue box is an imported source that will take resources in Power BI, while the red and the green islands will take limited resources because they are only a reference to the bigger sources out there. Okay, so that's basically what's going to happen for composite models. Now, let's see if we can dive into a little bit of what happens here in the background, while I'll try also to see the chat. I'm going to see that there's 14 messages somewhere. And now I'm just hoping that Zoom plays with me to allow me to see the chat, but nope. That's too bad. Okay. There we go, that's the chat. And now I want that on that screen. Let's see if there's anybody asking things that I need to cover here. Okay, James is giving feedback on DAX. Cool, thank you. I'll read that later. Let's see. The full calculation. Okay, I'll read that later. David, no, I don't have a PBX because it was very personal. It was really based on, for example, what do we find more important? Distance to work, distance to family, distance to hobbies, distance to, let's say, nature, and all of that combined. Security, you know, like how many burglaries or police accidents have been there in a certain neighborhood. So mushing that all of that together, and then presenting that using a very simple KPI with red, green, and yellow. But that was actually in the Netherlands, so I didn't do it here. Now let's see. There's people about the oh, Canada also does it the other way around with dates. Of course it is. They do. So yeah, and then the when we talk about, you know, format strings, of course it's also the decimal you know, with the comma versus the dot that, you know, people do differently across the world. So there's a bunch of things that you can do here with the format string. Cool. So let's see. Security-wise, we'll get there, by the way, in a second from now. Okay. So what happens here is, come on, clickety. Thank you. When you think about it, when you go back to your first step, the moment you connected to this enterprise semantic model, let's assume that was my first step, right? That's what was in the demo. The red island was my first connection. The moment I do that with Power BI, there's no local model. There's nothing in Power BI that contains the data. The only thing it knows is whenever you fire a query, when you create a visual, you're actually creating a query, we'll just send it to whoever is on that side of the line, and we'll wait for them to get back, and that's the answer, and that's what we're going to use to build the visual. There's no local data model. And we don't need to because we're not storing anything. Now, the moment you bring in your second model, there's still no local model because, well, we don't need it. But the moment you build this relationship between the two, as I did in the demo, we need a local model because this relationship between the two is actual information that's not contained in either of the two sources you used. So at that point, we upgrade you to a composite model, which really means creating a local analysis services model that knows source A and source B and defines that relationship and stores and tracks that relationship between the two. Now, this doesn't hurt because creating a local model, that's what you've been doing all the time if you import data. The moment you import data into Power BI, we create a local model. So even if you never have been aware of that, it has been happening all the time. So this doesn't hurt. The only thing is we'll actually tell you for now that this is happening. Now, what happens is that remote model becomes, let's say, a layer between your local model, between the remote models and tables and your Power BI instance. So any metadata about that enterprise semantic model will be contained into Power BI, which means table names, column names, those kind of things. Okay. And we're actually going to query the local model while the data still sits in that enterprise semantic model, and we call that the remote model from them. So let's walk through an example. Let's say a very simple example. I'm not doing composite models here yet. I'm just going to take Power BI Desktop. I'm going to connect live to, let's say, Azure Analysis Services. I build a report and I publish it to the Power BI service. Now, what happens here is you just get a new report, and that report connects to the Azure Analysis Services source, that live source. Nothing special, nothing, out of the ordinary here, right? This is expected behavior. You connect to an Azure Analysis Service, you build the visuals, you publish it, and you get a new report. Fine. Now let's make it slightly more interesting. Let's say I connect to my enterprise semantic model and I see this, let's say, decimal number that has this weird formatting that my audience is not used to, and I'm going to change that format string. So that step 2 now is not just creating the report. No, it means changing something about the data in my Power BI Desktop environment. For this, we need the local model. So now you're really already building a composite model, although it consists of only one source. And when you publish that, you end up with not only the new report as you expected, but also a new data set. And that data set is a very small one because it only points to the source that I used in the beginning, the blue box here in the middle, and tracks that one change or however many changes you made to the data model. That is what it's tracking. It's not containing any data. It just contains metadata about the source and any changes you made. So your format string change is not persisted in the central model at all, because remember, this is IT ISAM, right? You are not allowed to overwrite that data. You should be lucky you were even allowed to read it. So overwriting it, no way. And we don't want you to do that, right? However, you're free to make changes to the data model however you see fit, and we'll track those changes and show them to the user. So you create a new report and a new data set. Now let's make it into a real composite model by starting with the same source, connecting live, and then importing data from Excel. Now, The moment I go to step 2 here, there is no local instance yet. But the moment I execute step 2 to say, hey, I want to import data from Excel into Power BI, this is where we create the local model. You publish that. What you end up with is, again, a new report and a new data set. Okay, so one of the things that people know or notice here is that if you start using composite models this way, you will end up with a lot of new data sets. And that's something we need to talk about. We call this chaining, because think about it. This blue box could very well be an enterprise, a composite model by itself. It could already have combined sources from somewhere else, right? It's just a Power BI data set or Azure Never services. It could have done a lot of myriad of things. So let's say it's a Power BI data set. It could have already been a composite model. So really what you're doing here is you're taking this composite model and adding another one on top. And then somebody else might be taking your composite model that you published in step 3 here and adding another one on top of that, making a very small change, or maybe making a huge change to that data set. Extending it maybe with another source that you didn't even know about. So you'll see that this can continue and continue. We call this the chain of data sources. Now, chaining is something that's great. It's a great functionality from here. However, we also want to provide enterprises with ability to limit the amount of change that we're going to see. Because otherwise, we not only get report sprawl, we also get data set sprawl. So we're going to give you ways of limiting the creation of new data sets, actually creation of new composite models from a data set. So you can mark a data set. That's the word I was looking for. You can mark a data set or an Azure and other services database and say, you know what, I want to discourage people from building a composite model on top of this. You can still create a new report on top of it, but you cannot extend or personalize it anymore. Okay, and also that chain is going to be limited. We are not entirely sure, but for now, we'll go with 5 steps in the chain, right? So your blue box here, step 1. Your Excel is and that composite model is step 2. If somebody takes your composite model, that's step 3, etc., until we're to 5. We think that's kind of good as a limitation, but we don't really know. We'll see in practice. There's no practical limit. It's just something we put a stake in the ground and said 5 sounds like a great number of shackles in the chain here. So that's how we limit the chain to combat data set sprawl in your environment. Now, talking about enterprises, there's another couple of things that we're doing, because really in IT staan, in enterprise, it becomes important to understand how data flows through the organization, how where data started, what happened in the meantime before it landed on the queen's or king's or managers or CEO's table or tablet to look at it, right? So can we track all of that using data lineage or impact analysis features and see how data flows through your organization? And the answer is yes, we can. We do already have that. We have lineage view. We have an impact analysis view. It's already there in the service. However, there's a couple of things it doesn't do, because really this scenario where you build on top of one data set and add another data set on top of that, and maybe you build another one on top, that doesn't exist, right? So here's a mock-up of how that's going to look like. What you will see here is your SQL server feeds into sales, which is your enterprise semantic model that has 2 reports hanging off of it. And there's a new data set, budget and sales, who's dependent on sales, and is actually a composite model that takes data from sales and mushes it up with an Excel sheet called budgets. And from there, a report has been created called sales and budget. There could have been multiple reports, but just for simplicity, this one, right? So this is a new capability we'll see in the lineage view to show this chain of data, where this chain is now 2 pieces long, right? And I can go to budget and sales and say, you know what? Let's see who's really dependent on me. Okay, so in Europe, there's the Europe reporting workspace, and there's a sales and budget Europe data set that's actually dependent on me. So this chain is not only 2 part long, no, it's 3 already, right? So all of this will be shown in this lineage view. Now we're still working through the details here. And probably by the time we go general available with this, the focus will be just one layer out from the one you're looking at. So for example, if you started the lineage view or the impact analysis on budget and sales, you'll see whoever you are dependent on, like upstream, and who's directly dependent on you. So there won't be the full chain. However, that's something we're working on, to build the full chain from the start of the, let's say, the river all the way downstream. Now, the other thing is, the moment you start updating budget and sales, you need to be aware of who is dependent on you. You might have made a change that will break their report and their data set, and hence their report. So we'll see something like this in Power BI Desktop, where you will be prompted to, when you replace the data set, to understand that you're not only impacting your own report, but also somebody else's data set. You will be able to understand what that data set is. Okay, so that's basically the vision for our impact analysis. And this basic functionality, as I just showed you here on the slides, will be there in general availability. Whenever we get to that, there's full chain or full tree of data sources if you want. That's something we're working on to bring shortly after GA. Now, talking about enterprises, we have a couple other things to talk about. Data protection. Now, there's a couple of things you can do, right? You can label a data set in the Power BI service. You can say this data set is highly confidential. Now, if somebody creates a composite model from my highly confidential data set, what data label does that composite model have? And if somebody changed from that composite model, what label does that model get? So basically, the plan we're following here is that data set labels are retained, and the most restrictive item in the whole chain is the most restrictive label, I should say, in the chain is applied to the composite model. You are able to add labels in Power BI Desktop, but you won't be able to remove a label, right? So if I connect to a highly confidential source, I won't be able to go in Power BI Desktop and say, no, this is not highly confidential anymore, right? I cannot remove that label. I cannot take it off. I can add labels, but I cannot take that one off. Okay, so just to see that a little bit visually, let's see, we have an enterprise semantic model, highly confidential. We have a medium business impact departmental database. We have a workgroup Excel that is unclassified. It doesn't have any classification at all. So I can go in and say, you know what, I'm just going to go, let's see, I'm just going to go click. Why is my clicker not working? Come on, next slide, please. There we go. I'm going to go and create a new model. I'm going to create a model on this workgroup Excel. I'm going to import the data and create model A. This model A will be unclassified because there's no label in the Excel. Now I'm going to build a model B that takes data from the workgroup Excel and also meshes in some data from the departmental database. Now that model is labeled medium business impact because that's the highest one. And the same for C. If I connect data from the enterprise semantic model and the departmental database, my data set will be labeled as highly confidential. And if I build a composite model from C and B, a model named D, that will be highly confidential simply because the highest one that I'm using is C. So that's why that applies to D, right? So that is one way of securing the data. The other way, of course, is RLS, row level security, and object level security, by the way. I should talk about those two as well, both of them. We're still working through the details here, but there's a couple of interesting situations where you get weird behavior if you follow the current behavior of RLS and just blindly apply them to this new composite models world where you can have a local model versus a remote model. So we're still working through the details, but basically what we're doing is saying if RLS is defined remote, that RLS should always apply, right? So if RLS is defined on your remote model saying you're only allowed to see Canada stores, there should be no way for you to pry that off somehow and say, no, I'm allowed to see more, because really you shouldn't be. That rule was there, right? However, it becomes more interesting if the remote model says Canada, and then your local composite model that you're creating is actually saying just US. Because what will we do? Will we error? Will we not show anything? How do we handle, for example, explicit measures defined in a remote model where there's RLS? And well, if you start using that with an RLS locally or even without RLS, how will that all work? So all of that is still a little bit under discussion, but be aware we're discussing that. We're thinking about how RLS should work, how OLS, object level security, should work in this composite models world. So I'm not entirely ready to tell you everything about it because it has not been set in stone yet. But rest assured, we're thinking about it. We're doing the right thing to make sure that this is going to be a solution you can actually use in enterprises, because it follows all the confidentiality with data labels, the lineage, and the security that you expect it to have. Now, that almost wraps up my slides for tonight, and I'm in a good shape because I have 2 more minutes, so I can wrap this up. And in the wrap up, I'll quickly go back to our business analyst, the story we talked about, right? Now imagine we're here, Composite Models has been updated. You have this shiny new version, and you came back from Tajikistan to Business Venezuela, you meet with the Queen, and you say, you know what? I've been able to bridge the gap between Tajikistan, Business Venezuela, been able to mash it up, been able to create this magic report for you. And if you ask me, we should go ahead with a trade deal, but of course it's up to you. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be awesome that you were able to bridge these two worlds that are so divided? And that's what we're here for. And that's what Composite Models, the updated version, will bring. So life is good again. And everybody lives happily ever after, as any story should end, right? So with that, let's go for questions and feedback. Now, I'm just going to start scrolling through the chat. But yeah, I don't know, Mark, maybe people can unmute themselves as well if they want to ask something. But I can go through the chat and start answering the questions as we go. Okay?
Sure, yeah, that works for me, Jeroen.
Okay. Let's see. How does Synapse, or the service formerly known as Azure SQL Data Warehouse, fit into all of this? I worked on the Azure SQL Database team for a little bit, so I'm kind of biased when I see Azure SQL. So how does that fit into all of this? Well, you know, really, Synapse is, for us, one of those enterprise sources. And no, it's not on the list for Composite Models today because we treat it slightly differently. And we're still working through the details, and really Synapse is still working through the details of what they really are. So for now, I'm not ready to tell you it is just one of those sources because we treat it slightly special. We will have a deeper integration with them that is not the same on the same level as, for example, SQL Server Analysis Services or Azure Analysis Services. It's going to be deeper than that. But we're still working through the details there, so we cannot really disclose what it's going to look like. But we have not forgot about Synapse. Let's see. MDX. Donald saying MDX has been dead for 10 years for him. Well, you know, I kind of agree with you, sir. You know, honestly, I only think there's 2 people that actually really understand DEX, that, you know, the 2 people that came up with the standard. All the curly brackets and square brackets and, you know, nightmares from years ago. Security from each source, I think I answered part of that. RLS and OLS is the answer here. Nested composite models, Jack. What is that? What is a nested composite model? Is that the chain that I was talking about, or is there something else you have in mind here?
Yeah, that's right. It was chained, just different terminology. Okay. The same thing.
I like the word nested though. Maybe I'll steal that from you if I may.
No problem.
Cool. So yeah, no, I mean, yes, chains will be there, right? So we will have, in your words, nested composite models where one bases on the other. We'll have 5 chains, that's the start. But yeah, definitely if we see customers using this for more than 5, it's just a practical, like we need to start somewhere. We need to just, scope it for 5 for now. We don't expect a lot of enterprises doing more than that, but we might be totally wrong. Of course, we spoke to customers, but yeah, we'll see.
But we're an ISV, and we might be doing more than that.
Well, happy to talk, and then we can change that. Every islands have a particular color. That's Philippe asking. Well, no, that's just the mock-up. We're not gonna go with colors probably, but it's up to the designers, because colors also brings like a lot of usability aspects, right? How do you help somebody distinguish a dataset A from B if they're colorblind, right? If they don't see the difference between red and green, that won't work. So we'll have to come up with something else, and designers are already working on it. So I don't think colors will be it, but there will be a way of distinguishing dataset A from B using, for example, an icon and different lines or whatever. There's also going to be a legend going to be added to the model view, because we are aware with composite models we're introducing a whole slew of new constructs, really, if you will, to the data model view, right? I mean, right now it's just relationships in a table and a measure and a calculated column. Well, that's doable, and then a direction maybe, and a cardinality for a relationship. But we might now have different types of relationships. Should we maybe visually tell you that this relationship goes from one island to another, because that might have impact? Or what happens if we zoom out and we see multiple islands? Should we still show all the tables? Will we change that a little bit? So there's things that are going on there to make it easier to work with all of these types of data and types of artifacts in this composite model world, where there's a lot of new artifacts coming. It's just, James asks, is it just the addition of a relationship that introduces a local model, connect to multiple models and leverage measures from both? Any effort in difference if introducing a personalized measure? So no, it's actually anything you do, James, to the remote data set. So if you add a measure, if you add a relationship, if you add a calculated column, if you want to change a format string, if you want to change a name, or if you want to hide a table from the model, all of those things are changes that we need to persist in a local model, because we cannot push them back anywhere else. So all of those changes, big or small, will be persisted in the local model. Of course, your report, if you just stick to building graphs and not adding any calculations or relationships or other model type things, if you just stick to building a couple of graphs, you won't have a new local model, and you won't have a new data set being published. Let's see. Conrad agrees with my sketch of how IT feels about the data. Well, hey, glad you like it. Let's see. Chain of data sources, how deep can you go? Well, 5 for now. Let's see. Good lineage tracking. Yes, that's what I agree with. We'll see how far we can go there to build that, to build that good view. As I said, we're going to have one version of it, but for post GA, like slightly after, we're going to try to build the whole chain. But there's interesting things that we need to do there on the visual layer to make that work. Let's see. Mohammed sends me a private message. Can composite models be used to overcome Power BI data size limits, e.g., joining 2 1 GB Power BI data sets? Yes, you could actually do that. So you could say, connect to 2 Power BI data sets, presumably from different workspaces even, and publish that composite model that builds a relationship, for example, between the 2, or adds a measure in a third workspace. You could totally do that. That third composite model will be very small because there's no data in there, right? It's just pointers to and metadata about the data models, but no actual data is being loaded into the model. Let's see. What else? Elena says something about the data flow. We change all sources that may have been removed. Huh. That sounds like a bug. I see you already reported it. I will have to look into that in a little bit more depth here. Ethan asks the great question, whether or not this requires premium or even the fancy new PPU, the premium per user, which I don't have the liberty to announce any cost for, by the way, before you ask. So the answer here is no. You don't need premium or premium per user to be able to use composite models. This will be available for everyone. Shared or premium, doesn't matter. So you can start with a premium source, or you can start with a shared source, add your Excel sheet, etc., etc. Of course, the limits in performance, the limits in capacity, limits in storage still apply to when you publish that new data set back to your workspace, right? Let's see. Will we be able to use the AI visuals when using a composite model as a data set, i.e. the key inferences, decom tree, smart narratives? The answer is yes, that should work. Q&A is slightly different, and that's something that's still up in the air a little bit onto when that's going to be supported across all of this, because Q&A really requires this close relationship to a composite model, to the data source, to really work in a performant manner. So that's something we're still designing. If we can support that from day one, if not, we'll be adding it shortly after. Let's see. How would refresh timing work between composite model sources? How would refresh timing? What do you mean with refresh timing? Who asked that? Okay, Mark. I don't know who you are, but maybe you can unmute yourself and ask and explain a little bit what you mean with refresh timing. I don't necessarily get what you mean here.
I was just meaning that you might have a SQL source or that you're mashing up that can't have the same refresh sort timing as the rest of the things you've added to the composite model, which will be pretty confusing for users, potentially.
Right, so are you talking about data refresh on the servers when you publish the composite model, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, when you try to connect to, you know, just other sources other than enterprise sources.
Right, so essentially what, I'm not sure if this is going to answer your question, but let me explain. So when I hear refreshed, I think about how do we handle potentially cascading refreshes if you build a composite model on two sources, right? Let's say you build a composite model on source A and B, and then source A refreshes, I don't know, in 10 minutes from now, and source B in an hour from now. Should we be smart about that and, you know, automatically somehow refresh your composite model, right? And essentially the answer is, we'll refresh whenever one of those sources has been refreshed. So if A refreshes in 10 minutes and B in an hour from now, you will see your composite model really being refreshed, quote unquote, because it's not really refreshing, with that data immediately after the other refreshes happen. Why am I saying not really refreshing? Well, because remember, there's no data in here, right? The A and B are just remote sources, so there's nothing really to refresh for us. Now, of course, it becomes interesting if things change in A, right? And A suddenly removed the table you depended on for your composite model. What do we do then? So then after a refresh, we'll actually break your data set, potentially break your report, depending on how you used it. But all of that will, of course, come whenever we finished syncing the metadata. And you will be able to influence that part of that a little bit in the dataset refresh setting. So you will be able to tell us which credentials you want to use to refresh the remote model with. If you have multiple, which, you know, you can choose different credentials for each remote model. And you can also change you will also be able to change the refresh speed, if you will, for updating the metadata as you do today with a live connection, right? In the live connection today, you have the same capability that will still apply to a composite model as well. Let's see. So Jennifer's excited. Well, that's great. Mukesh is excited as well. That's awesome. Any known limitation for using this with embedded? So embedded is something that we're actively looking into. Embedded is on a slightly different cadence than the enterprise and semantic and the self-service pieces of the world. So I cannot tell you it will be available in GA. As you have seen with other features, it kind of follows shortly after. So that will probably happen with composite models as well. It will be shortly after composite model is generally available. And then the question, will we be able to define the XML endpoint? That's one of the bigger questions that we have to answer before we can do the embedded, functionality. Let's see. Will Azure and other services models be available at the same time as Power BI models? I assume, Donald, you mean, will the functionality to be able to connect to Azure and other services models as a remote model be available at the same time as a Power BI model, using a Power BI model as a remote model? The answer is yes, that will be at the same time.
Cool, thanks.
James, please verify your comments about composite models not needing premium. No, so, okay, James, you don't need premium to build a composite model. Of course, if your data set that you use as a remote model in itself is already a premium data set, you might only be able to publish it back to that premium workspace. But other than that, there's no restrictions. So if you can build a composite model on an Azure and other services source and an Excel sheet and never ever touch premium. Right, Deepo was already kind of helping me out here. Thank you for that. Let's see, how far behind am I in the chat, or did I reach the bottom of the chat so far? I think I did. SSS compatibility, what's the required update required to use the composite model, i.e. a patch or a server upgrade? So that is under discussion for now. We expect this to be a patch for analysis services. And also the vNext, of course, for analysis services engine is something that we're actively looking into, because that's also somewhere around the corner in the relatively near future. So all of that will be coming into one big package as an update to the engine. Cool. We have 15 minutes left. Of course, I can go outside and walk my dog now, which would be a good idea, but I'm still here. So if there's other questions, feel free to unmute yourself, jump in, concerns, feedback, and I will promise I will go back to the chat, look at what Elena and I think somebody else at the beginning has provided some feedback for text usability. So I'll definitely look into that a little later this week. Can AES only be a remote target? Remote target. What do you mean with a remote target, Jack? Sorry.
I mean, you can't define a composite model inside of the AAS, right? It can only be a target of a composite model, or is that something that's going to be supported?
No, for a composite model as such, you can only publish it back to Power BI, but you can absolutely use AES as a remote source. Now, technically, the changes we're making in the engine of Power BI.com, which is really analysis services, are also applied to Azure analysis services. So technically, I presume, and I'm not entirely sure, but you should be able to build an actual composite model inside of Azure analysis services. However, you would have to do that on your own. There will be no UI. You would have to do it in XML endpoints. You will wait for that to open up and to be supported, and you will have to deal with all of the credential management stuff and the syncing stuff and the metadata being outdated and all of that good stuff that we do in the service for you. But technically, I'm not entirely sure, but I would say it's the same engine. So
Okay,
be able to do it.
that's pretty interesting.
Will be a lot of work though. Let's see. Ethan asks, how much control available to limit the use of data sets down the chain if, for example, only allow a certain user group to build the next chain composite models? So yes, that's a good question, Ethan. In order to build a composite model that changed from another, you need something we call build permissions. So it will be tied to that. So if you don't have build permissions on that model, you will not be able to build a composite model from that model. So let's say IT published model A and hasn't given me build permissions on model A, I will not be able to create a composite model on model A. If I have build permissions, I can and I will be able to create that composite model. So I hope that answers the question there. David, it's kind of the same answer, right? Can you control who has the ability to create or publish composite models? Well, yes. Right, with the build permissions, you can enable people to build a composite model, which also means in the same, basically also means if you have the build permissions, you have the build permissions on the model and on a workspace to publish, you can then publish that composite model. So for now, there will just be the build permissions that will be the way we're going to handle all of that. And of course, there's the discourage chaining setting on the model itself that you can set to stop people from doing this, even if you have build permissions. Certified data sets does not automatically carry, no. Ethan, no. If one of your sources is certified, that is great, but it doesn't mean that your composite model will be automatically certified. That will be very weird, because you could do whatever you want in that composite model. I could manipulate the data by hiding columns and introducing a new column that bears the same name. Let's say there's a margin calculation, right? There's a margin calculator column in my data set in a remote table, in a remote model. I connect to it in my composite model, and then what I do is I rename that margin column to say margin underscore old, and then I add a new calculator column that with the name margin, do an entirely different calculation there, present it back in a visual as margin. Somebody that is not looking any deeper will not know that I actually hit the original column, overridden it with a different one. So if we would go as far as say that data set is now certified, that will be a hell of a problem. So no, that data set will not be certified unless somebody goes in and actively certifies it, of course. Any performance concerns, especially if composing two large models, say transactions and marketing? Well, we don't expect any performance issues, because the only thing we're downloading when we're creating this local model is the metadata about that model. Remember, we're not bringing the tens of terabytes of data from these remote models into your Power BI desktop instance, right? We're just connecting to them.
But how about, I'm more concerned with the queries, like if you're filtering one model with something from another model,
right?
It won't be as fast as it was all together, I wouldn't think.
No, you're absolutely right. They won't be as fast as local models. However, there's a couple of things that we can do, which we actually have a couple of tricks up our sleeves to make this happen a little bit faster, and that's something we're actively working on. That's why we're still in this phase slightly before public preview, because in the private preview we've seen a couple of those issues. So we're aware of the potential performance implications of doing a remote query, and we're building things that, for example, identify common columns across data sets to make that query happen faster, right? For example, if I have data set A and B and I have what is your example? Let's say finance transactions on a certain date. Chances are that the other model has the same date table or the same customer table. Right now, what we do is we bring that date table, we basically take the date key if you joined on that, and we take the full list of date keys and we bring it over to the remote model, the other remote model, to execute the query on. Now, if we know that the tables are the same on both sides, why would we bring over the full length of keys, right? Why would you just not query the remote B table? So that's essentially what we're building. We call it, I think we call it not simplified, but not similar columns. I think that's what we do. So if we know that the columns are the same on both of the sides, we can do a couple of those tricks to speed up the query performance, right? So that's where we're building as well.
And obviously, you know, that makes it even more important to have same date table that you're using in different models, or same way you're describing product names or something. Try to use the same dimension tables everywhere if you can.
So that means you really need to build like master data management. That kind of stuff becomes very important, right? A data catalog, like Azure Data Catalog, or you know, the things that they're doing to make sure that you can actually, you know, define this one golden quote unquote record of customers. That becomes way more important now in this new world, where just you using that one same data set, same table across the two sources will help the performance of the composite model, because we will be able to understand that will be the same data on both sides. So we don't have to go through full table scan here. In SQL terms, it's not a table scan, but you know, think about it as a table scan. We don't need to go through the table scan here and then do it once more on this side, right? We can just say, hey, these both are the same, so we're just going to rewrite the query and point it right to model B here.
Great. Yeah. Great answer. Thanks.
Sure. Let's see. Anything I'm missing? What tool do you recommend from now on? Build model using Visual Studio for AES, or use Power BI Desktop and use XML endpoints with eventually? Okay, so yeah, so this is that's an interesting question on the tools. If we want to, you know, talk about Visual Studio, bids like BI Development Studio, Power BI Desktop, XML endpoints, external tools. Honestly, what I see happening, and this is my personal take on it and my personal view, is I believe that we're slowly seeing a transformation of Power BI Desktop into self-service plus enterprise. So the vision here is to have one tool to span it all, right? So bids, like the BI Development Studio, all of that, the report designer, eventually in the fullness of time should roll into one tool to handle all of that. So if we would go, let's say 5 years from now or longer, I don't know, we'll see that happening. That's at least my experience and my expectation. So for me, if you want to build a composite model, you do that in Power BI Desktop, unless you want to gamble on me, what I was not entirely sure on. If you can do it on your own using XML endpoints, but you would build it using Power BI Desktop. That is really now, of course, with the external tools that we use as the ribbon, that's something that we allow people to do interesting things that we currently cannot do in Power BI Desktop, right? Of course, Power BI Desktop as a tool is still something you need to balance between being very simple and self-service-like and being very powerful and complete in enterprise world. So both of those is something we're trying to balance. So that's why the external tools are here to help us. If you're looking for doing advanced things, you can go to external tools and use those. And we might even see some external tools built by Microsoft in the near future, where we're going to say, you know what? And this is not a statement, it's just, me thinking about that right now, saying, hey, maybe there's a couple of things that we won't be putting into Power BI Desktop right away because it's really a self-service tool, but we build an integration with something else, let's say BITS, Power BI Development Studio, and link them together somehow that you can use the power of Development Studio while changing the things in the actual model in Power BI Desktop. I mean, that could be a scenario. We're not doing it right now. I'm not aware of any effort or whatever. It's not on a roadmap. It's just something that I could imagine happen in the future. Okay, 3 minutes left. Let's see. Will Composite Models support bringing models from AES that reside in another region than the default region of the tenant? Yes, that should work. Can paginated reports connect to this Composite Models as source? I don't see why not, Ethan. So I would assume that would work because it's just a Power BI data set. And, you know, if a paginated report can connect to a Power BI data set, and it can, then it should be able to connect to a composite model because it's just a Power BI data set. I think there will be a lot of frustrated analysts if it turns out composing pro models require going premium or premium user. Composing pro models, not sure what that means, but no, again, creating a composite model is something that we're aiming to bring to anybody. Pro, premium, premium user, any. Okay, so that's 2 minutes left. Any last remarks before I hand it back to Mark? No? Okay. Well, I hope this was useful. I hope this was time well spent as well. Please leave some feedback, questions if you have them after a night's sleep or whenever. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to chat and to talk and to walk through a little bit more detail when the time comes for that. Let's see if I have a closing slide here. Oh yeah, I do actually. Here you go. Here's my contact details. Find me on Twitter or LinkedIn or email me directly. Please use the ID's website. Join the community. We're active there. We're active on Twitter, on Reddit as well. And I know the ID's website has not been something we've been paying as much attention to as we should, but trust me, we're trying to do better. So yeah, with that, I thank you for being here, for spending the time with me tonight, and I hope this was useful. And keep the feedback coming, and keep building whatever you're building with Power BI, and don't forget to have fun.
Thank you. That was outstanding.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Yeah, well, thanks so much for attending, everyone. We will see you at the next event. And Jeroen, thanks so much for your time this evening. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. And anytime you need me, let me know.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeroen. You were fantastic.
Yep, thanks.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Have a good night, everyone.
Alrighty.
Or morning or whatever.